Good morning. I am your host, Greg Simon, and I want to welcome you to another episode of America's most exciting regulatory reality television show, Real World Evidence Shark Tank. Back up. There we go. Real World Evidence Shark Tank, where every week we ask the question, is your evidence fit for purpose? Here's how our contest works. Our applicants have spent years and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars generating evidence to support the approval of a new medical product or a new indication. They know that our regulators are supposed to be interested in that real-world evidence thing. And of course, they asked up front, what is real-world evidence and what evidence would be acceptable? They got our usual answer. It depends. We'll know it when we see it. Now comes the moment of truth. Each applicant will have only a few seconds to present that real-world evidence, and our regulatory shark will decide if that evidence is fit for purpose, or if those who develop the product will end up sleeping with the fishes. Now you can cue the music, and our regulatory shark. Disguise, a stone-faced federal bureaucrat. Now, let's bring on our first victim, our first applicant.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present the outcomes of our long research and innovative approaches to drug development. We have just completed a 5-year pragmatic randomized trial of our oral hypoglycemic compared to the most commonly used existing product. The main outcomes were cardiovascular mortality and all-cause mortality, measured using national death certificate data and Social Security beneficiary data. Our new product reduced both cardiovascular mortality and all-cause mortality over 3 years.
Did all the coroners who filled out the death certificates complete their GCP training?
Well, we never thought of that, and in our earlier discussions with the agency, this never came up as a concern.
Well, you should probably think again. And now you'll have 5 more years to think about it.
I suppose that applicant 1 will sleep with the fishes. Now bring on our next applicant.
He's a winner already.
Thank you, O Wizard, for granting me the audience. I'm from the aptly named North Pole, South Pole Pharmaceutical Company. Our new product is a breakthrough treatment to prevent suicide in people with bipolar disorder. The unmet need is urgent, and we don't think we can wait for a traditional randomized clinical trial. So we conducted a single-arm trial of 200 patients treated in 4 academic centers, all very, 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 very experienced at conducting clinical trials with meticulous assessment of suicidal behavior outcomes. That's meticulous assessment. We've compared outcomes in the single-arm trial to a matched group of patients identified from a commercial insurance claims database. Using a well-validated claims-based algorithm to identify suicidal behavior. It's a very, very good data analysis, the best data analysis in the history of the FDA. The risk of suicide attempt was 40% lower in the single-arm trial.
Wow, meticulous assessment of outcomes in comparison to a real-world sample. That sounds like exactly what we're supposed to be paying more attention to. You may pass.
And that is another exciting episode of Evidence Shark Tank, Some will pass and some will not. And you never know or could predict. And that's what makes for good reality television. Let's hear it for our players. Now for the real welcome. On behalf of the Drug Forum of the National Academies and my co-chair in organizing this workshop series, Mark McClellan, who'll join us later in the agenda, I want to welcome all of you. I want to thank the FDA's Office of the Commissioner for helping to support this workshop and this ongoing series of workshops. This workshop is the second of a three-part series hosted by the National Academies Forum on Drug Discovery, Development, and Translation. The Drug Forum focuses on key problems and strategies in the research and development lifecycle for drugs and offers an ongoing neutral venue for various stakeholders, as you can see from the people in this room, from across government, academia, industry, foundations, consumer and patient groups to discuss and confront issues of mutual interest and concern. Through workshops and other activities like this, the Forum brings together thought leaders to focus attention on critical issues in research and development and fosters collaboration. In accordance with the National Academy's procedures, an independent planning committee, on which many of you participated, organized this workshop. I think we have a slide, but it may be out of order to list planning committee members. We'll try to get to that after this. This is a standalone workshop. It's not part of an official ongoing study by the National Academies. There will be an overview summary and presentation and discussion made during the workshop and prepared by a rapporteur to describe what's transpired here, prepared in accordance with the National Academy's policy broadly available to the public. Today's workshop will focus on various questions, and we'll get to in a minute, related to real-world evidence and its use in the development and evaluation of new medical products. This will be a more sort of a town hall style meeting. We'll have lots of time for discussion, and we hope you'll all be active participants in that. So in terms of level setting and setting the stage, let's see, is that going to, yeah, okay. There we go. Start with some definitions. And I think we have to acknowledge that this term real-world evidence has sometimes been challenging to define. Those of you who were at our previous workshop may remember a challenge that my co-chair Mark McClellan threw out, saying, if we're still having meetings defining the term real-world evidence, we probably haven't made any real progress. Or a more provocative challenge by Rory Collins, who was here with us at our last meeting. Some of you may know him. Rory is good at being provocative. At a January meeting, Rory took the position that the term real-world evidence has so many different meanings to so many different people that it's really not useful anymore and we should just stop using it. I don't think I would go as far as Rory goes, but I think he's put his finger on an important issue. And the challenge, I think, is when we talk about real-world evidence, we're often talking about all sorts of somewhat related concepts floating around in an amorphous mass. We're talking about historical control groups, data from mobile devices, cluster randomized trials, variable treatment adherence, more pragmatic safety monitoring, and the discussion when we talk about real-world evidence often ping-pongs among these different topics without ever settling anything. I will claim, though, we've made some progress. I think at the end of our last workshop and in some of the meetings that happened since, we've tried to bring some more organization to this idea, and what we've tried to do is to organize that cloud into three areas. That real-world evidence, the key constructs in that larger real-world evidence construct include the construct of real-world data. By that we mean data that comes from health system records, data that comes from mobile devices, from various connected scales and glucometers, what people call the Internet of Things. We're talking about real-world treatment. By that we mean studying treatments with typical providers and typical patients, accepting that there will be highly variable quality of and adherence to treatment. And we're talking about real-world treatment assignment. By that we mean observational contemporaneous comparisons, comparisons to historical control groups, or sometimes comparisons that use some method of assignment that lies between the completely naturalistic and the completely randomized individual level trial, such as stepped wedge or cluster randomized trials. So when we think about these three areas, that naturally leads to three questions about real-world evidence. Can we rely on real-world data? Can we rely on real-world treatment? And can we actually learn something useful from real-world treatment assignment? Now, I think, and this will be sort of the theme of this workshop, each of those questions is posed as a yes-no question, and none of them really are yes-no questions. These questions really should take the form, when can we rely on real-world data, assuming we sometimes can and sometimes cannot? When can we rely on real-world treatment? And when can we learn from real-world treatment assignment? And the answer to all those questions is, of course, it depends, which is always the right answer to any question about science. The challenge, though, is, and some of you may remember an editorial written recently by a certain nameless and stone-faced federal bureaucrat making the point that if we were to compare the results of a real-world study with observational treatment assignment to randomized trials and show that they come up with the same answer, that is not very useful because we're deciding if the new method worked based on the answer it got, and we need to have a way of deciding that up front. The analogy that Rob used was drawing the bullseye around the hole in the barn after the hole is there. It's equally possible to draw the bullseye somewhere else besides the hole after the hole is there. Whether our answer is yes or whether our answer is no, the point, and this was the point of our silly little exercise today, that we need some way to judge up front what the answer is to that it depends question. So our meeting over the next day and a half is going to be all about it depends on what. So we're going to dive into those three questions a little deeper. When we ask when can we rely on real-world data, we'll be asking when can we rely on electronic health records data from real-world practice to accurately assess key characteristics of participants in a trial, such as their eligibility or baseline health state, key prognostic factors, the outcomes of interest. When can we rely on data generated by free-living humans outside of a healthcare context from mobile phones or connected devices? And when is some adjudication or post-processing of those real-world data useful? When does it improve precision or possibly reduce bias, and when does it simply add time and cost? When can we rely on real-world treatment really divides into two questions. One of those is about valid inference, the question there being when does variability in treatment adherence or variability in the quality or character of treatment yield a valid signal? When does it tell us something true about differences between treatments, and when is it just noise obscuring the truth? But we also have concerns when we're talking about real-world treatment about safety. When can we rely on real-world providers to accurately assess and respond to potential adverse events, especially when we're talking about new treatments? And then finally, when can we learn from real-world treatment assignment? When can we rely on inference that comes from these hybrid designs, such as cluster randomized trials or stepped wedge trials? Under what conditions can we rely on inference from completely observational or naturalistic comparisons or even historical controls? And most important, getting back to Rob Califf's editorial, how can we judge the validity of those observational comparisons in advance rather than waiting until we've observed the result after the fact? We'll have 3 sessions, and they will follow sort of the same rhythm. We will frame the question. We'll present some use cases which are selected not to be, sometimes maybe there's a clear answer. This is a good, this worked or this didn't work. But oftentimes it's a gray area, and we're intending to use some of those gray areas to prompt some discussion about answering those it depends questions. When is it we can do this? When is it that it doesn't work? We're hoping to identify some areas of agreement and disagreement. And at the end of each session, but especially when we come back tomorrow, what we're hoping to do is, can we discover some generalizable principles so that these decisions about the validity or utility of real-world data or of real-world treatment or of inference from real-world treatment assignment aren't just one-offs or something that we decide after the fact. There is going to be one challenge, and that is to avoid the ping pong that sometimes I think makes this discussion difficult. What is likely to happen is when we are talking about real-world data, the conversation will veer into talking about treatment assignment, which is a different question. Or when we're talking about treatment assignment, someone will start to talk about safety monitoring, which is a different question. And if we do that, we will never get out of the room. So what I'm asking all of us to do is to try to stay on task when we're in these sessions, to keep the conversation, even though the use cases may bring up questions in other areas, we'll say, we're trying to keep to this area now. All of us may, including myself, may be among the worst offenders. So what I did, Amanda gave us a little bell we can ring. Let's see. There we go. So the bell is, if someone gets off topic, anyone has permission to ring it, it'll be on the table. So if you hear somebody veering off into that other discussion, you can just stand up and ring the bell and everybody will know what that means, and maybe that will help us get back on task. That's our orientation. What we can do now is move directly to our first workshop, and what I want to do is introduce Greg Daniel, who's the director of the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy, and he's moderator of the first session. He'll come up and introduce that group.